His joy was never found in the chase, but in the ability to finally slow down, see clearly, and choose intentionally. Simplicity is not about deprivation. It is not about owning nothing, escaping society, or rejecting ambition. Simplicity is about deciding what deserves space in your life and what doesn't. It's about removing the noise so the signal becomes obvious. It's about choosing quality over quantity, depth over distraction, and fulfillment over accumulation. When less becomes intentional, less becomes powerful. In this audiobook, we will explore how subtracting the unnecessary creates room for what is truly valuable. We will learn how to reclaim our attention, protect our time, refine our priorities, simplify our environment, and build a life that feels lighter to carry and richer to live. You will discover that simplicity is not just a lifestyle. It is a mindset, a discipline, and ultimately a philosophy for freedom. The chapters ahead will give you practical tools, real strategies, and timeless principles to master the magic of a simple life, where you are no longer overwhelmed by everything around you, but guided by what truly matters within you. This journey is about redesigning your life from the inside out. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop letting life overwhelm you. Life has a way of piling up on us when we're not paying attention. Not all at once, but little by little, task by task, notification by notification, expectation by expectation. And before we know it, we aren't living our lives anymore. We're managing them. We're reacting to whatever comes at us, instead of directing where we want to go. It feels normal because everyone around us seems to be struggling the same way. But just because something is common doesn't mean it's okay. Being overwhelmed is not a sign of a full life. It's a sign of a cluttered one. Overwhelm happens when everything tries to matter at the same time. Every email, every message, every responsibility, every option, every request, every headline, everything demands your immediate attention. And when everything demands your attention, you end up giving your attention to nothing meaningful. You feel busy, but not productive. Active, but not fulfilled. Stimulated, but not satisfied. It's exhaustion without progress. And that's the trap. You can spend years in motion without ever moving forward. The first step toward a simpler life is not buying fewer things or cleaning out closets. The first step is stopping the automatic flood of demands on your time, attention, and energy. You must interrupt the pattern of reacting to everything and start choosing what is worth responding to. That requires awareness. It requires the ability to pause. It requires you to ask yourself a simple but powerful question. Is this important, or is it just loud? Loud things overwhelm you. Important things grow you. When you stop letting life overwhelm you, you begin to notice something interesting. Not everything needs your involvement. Not everything deserves your worry. Not every problem is yours to carry. Some problems belong to time. Some belong to other people. And some were never problems to begin with. They were just noise. You also start to realize that many of the things that overwhelm you exist only because you never questioned them. You accepted every invitation. You agreed to every responsibility. You held on to every expectation. You said yes when you should have said no. Overwhelm is rarely something life does to you. More often it's something you allow by default. That may sound uncomfortable, but it's actually good news, because if you allowed it, you can also change it. Stopping overwhelm doesn't require perfect discipline. It requires ownership. Ownership of your time. Ownership of your choices. Ownership of your boundaries. Without ownership, your life belongs to other people's priorities, other people's urgency, and other people's desires. With ownership, your life becomes yours again, and when life becomes yours again, things begin to simplify naturally. Now here is the part most people miss. Simplicity is not about having less to manage. It's about having less that needs managing. There's a big difference. You can declutter your home and still have a cluttered mind. You can delete apps and still have a chaotic calendar. You can organize your tasks and still feel emotionally overloaded. The real work happens inside. It happens when you choose what really matters and release what doesn't. When life stops overwhelming you, you gain something extremely valuable: mental breathing room, space to think, space to feel, space to make better decisions, space to actually live instead of just cope, space to hear yourself again. That space is where simplicity begins, and more importantly, where fulfillment grows. Chapter 2. Decide what actually matters. One of the biggest sources of complexity in life isn't the number of things you do, but the number of things you think you must care about. Modern life pressures you to value everything, every trend, every opportunity, every opinion, every possible path, every problem in the world. When everything matters, nothing matters deeply. And when nothing matters deeply, your life becomes a scattered collection of shallow priorities instead of a focused pursuit of meaningful ones. Deciding what actually matters isn't about making a list. It's about making a decision about the kind of person you want to be and the kind of life you want to build. Without that decision, you will drift into other people's priorities, other people's expectations, and other people's definition of success. Drifting is comfortable because it doesn't require clarity. It doesn't ask you to choose. But drifting never leads to fulfillment. Drifting leads to regret. Fulfillment, on the other hand, begins with conscious choice, especially the choice of what truly deserves your attention, time, and energy. When you lack clarity, life becomes heavier. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels personal. Everything feels like it requires your immediate involvement. But when you gain clarity on what matters, complexity begins to fall away. Unnecessary commitments become obvious. Unimportant responsibilities lose their grip. Distractions reveal themselves for what they are. Not temptations, but detours. You can't optimize a life you haven't defined. You can't simplify a life you haven't examined. You can't prioritize a life you haven't claimed as your own. To decide what matters, start by asking a better set of questions. Questions that many people never pause long enough to consider. What do I value more? Time or status? Freedom or approval? Depth or variety? Peace or noise? Progress or appearance? These questions expose what truly drives you. They also expose what truly drains you. The answers are personal, and they are often not the answers society expects. And that's precisely why clarity is powerful. It frees you from living someone else's story. Another helpful question is, what would make my life feel meaningful if everything else disappeared? This question cuts through the clutter. It removes the background noise of trends, achievement, comparison, and social pressure. It shifts you from wanting more to wanting what is essential. For many people, the answers that arise are shockingly simple: time with loved ones, meaningful contribution, personal growth, creative expression, peace, health, or spiritual groundedness. Few people say, I just need more notifications, or I need a bigger closet, or I wish I had more digital distractions. Those things often show up only when we stop thinking and start consuming. Once you identify what matters, the real work begins. Because simplicity isn't achieved by knowing, it's achieved by aligning. Alignment means your daily choices match your deeper values. And here's where most people get stuck. Values are easy to declare, but difficult to live. You can say you value health, but spend your days in habits that destroy it. You can say you value family, but spend no intentional time with them. You can say you value peace, but fill every empty moment with stimulation and noise. Values without alignment create guilt. Values with alignment create fulfillment. The good news is that alignment doesn't require dramatic overnight change. It doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require abandoning your responsibilities. It simply requires awareness and adjustment. A little alignment every week compounds into a radically different life over time. The question is not, can I redesign my entire life today? The question is, can I make one choice today that honors what I truly value? One healthier choice, one deeper conversation, one clearer boundary, one intentional pause. Small alignment is more powerful than grand intentions. Another key part of deciding what matters is recognizing that priority demands sacrifice. You cannot prioritize everything. When everything is a priority, nothing is. Choosing what matters means being at peace with what doesn't. And this is where people begin to resist simplicity, because simplicity requires loss. Not financial loss, but emotional loss. The loss of the fantasy of having it all. The loss of trying to please everyone. The loss of keeping every door open. True focus requires closing doors. True priority requires saying no. True simplicity requires letting go. This can feel uncomfortable at first, but on the other side of discomfort is liberation. When you decide what matters, you also decide who matters. Some relationships nourish you, others drain you. Some connections challenge you to grow, others keep you stuck. Some people want you to succeed, others only want you available. Reducing relational complexity is one of the highest forms of self-respect. That doesn't mean abandoning people, it means no longer abandoning yourself. Ultimately, deciding what matters is an act of courage. It is easier to follow the script that was handed to you. It is easier to pursue what everyone else pursues. It is easier to stay busy than to sit with clarity. But easy does not lead to meaningful. Easy leads to predictable. Easy leads to average. Meaningful begins when you choose direction rather than drift. So pause, take a breath and ask yourself, if my life were simpler, what would it be filled with? Whatever your answer is, that's the beginning of clarity. And clarity is the foundation upon which the magic of a simple life is built. Chapter 3. Remove what doesn't serve you. Once you decide what truly matters, the next challenge is clearing out everything that doesn't. And this is where most lives stay cluttered. Not because people don't know what they want, but because they don't remove what stands in the way. We tend to think simplification is about addition, adding better habits, adding routines, adding new strategies. But simplicity has always been a subtractive art. It is about removing, eliminating, cutting away, and letting go. When you stop trying to carry everything, life becomes lighter by design. The things that don't serve you show up in many forms. Some are obvious, like toxic relationships or time-wasting habits. Others are subtle, like outdated beliefs, hidden expectations, unnecessary obligations, and goals you no longer genuinely care about, but continue to pursue out of habit, ego, or fear of disappointing others. Life becomes complicated, not because we keep seeking joy, but because we keep holding on to everything we've outgrown. Start by looking at where your time goes. Time is the clearest indicator of what is consuming your life. You may discover that you are investing hours in activities that drain you, commitments that don't matter, and distractions that steal your attention without giving anything meaningful in return. Not everything that is enjoyable is valuable, and not everything that is valuable is enjoyable. But when something consumes your life without contributing to it, it becomes a thief, and thieves must be removed. Then look at your mental environment. What beliefs, stories, and assumptions clutter your mind? Maybe you're holding on to guilt about saying no. Maybe you believe productivity must always feel stressful. Maybe you think success means doing more instead of doing what actually moves the needle. Some beliefs served you once, but they don't serve you anymore. They belong to an older version of you, a version who didn't know what you know now. Growth requires updates, and updates often begin with unlearning. There is also emotional clutter, old resentments, grudges, comparisons, and attachments that consume energy quietly in the background. Emotional clutter is heavy because it takes space even when you're not actively thinking about it. You can go about your day pretending you're fine, but the emotional load weighs you down like an invisible backpack. Letting go isn't just a poetic idea, it's a practical strategy for reclaiming capacity. You cannot carry both old pain and new possibility. One must be released for the other to arrive. And then of course there are people. Not every person you meet in life is meant to stay. Some relationships are meant for a season, others are meant for a lesson, and a rare few are meant for life. The problem is when we hold on to seasonal relationships as if they are lifelong assignments. There are people who once supported you, but now limit you. People who once inspired you, but now drain you. People who once shared your path, but now resist your growth. Removing what doesn't serve you sometimes means redefining relationships, not with cruelty, but with clarity. Removing what doesn't serve you can feel uncomfortable at first. It might feel harsh, it might feel selfish, it might feel unfamiliar. But simplicity is not about being harsh or selfish. It's about being aligned. You were not designed to carry every responsibility, every expectation, every obligation, and every person who crosses your path. You were designed to choose, and choosing requires letting go. There's another layer to removal that people often overlook: removing opportunities. Opportunities are praised in modern culture. People say never say no to opportunity, but the truth is too many opportunities are just distractions, disguised as progress. Not every open door leads somewhere worth going. One of the most mature forms of wisdom is to stop chasing everything that shines and start selecting only what fits your direction. Every time you remove something that doesn't serve you, you create space. And space is a powerful asset. Space gives you room to think, room to breathe, room to redirect your efforts into what matters. Space gives your values actual territory to exist in. Without space, even good things suffocate. With space, even a few meaningful things can flourish. This removal process doesn't need to happen overnight. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It simply needs to be honest. You don't remove things because you dislike them. You remove them because they don't support the life you want to build. There's a difference, and that difference is what turns simplicity from an aesthetic into a philosophy. At some point you realize that a simpler life isn't created by adding more. It's created by removing the unnecessary. It's created by releasing what once felt important, but now feels heavy. It's created by embracing the courage to walk away from what no longer aligns with your values. Removing what doesn't serve you is not the end of freedom, it is the beginning of it. Chapter 4. Keep fewer, choose better. A simple life isn't defined by having nothing. It's defined by having the right things. When you keep fewer but choose better, you stop drowning in the noise of excess and start thriving in the richness of quality. Most people don't suffer from a lack of options. They suffer from an overload of them. Too many choices, too many possessions, too many projects, too many goals, too many social circles, too many opinions, too many demands for their attention. And yet, very few of these choices contribute meaningfully to their peace, their growth, or their fulfillment. Quality is a function of selection. When you choose better, you don't need more. You don't need 5 mediocre friendships when 2 deeply aligned ones give you more support, more meaning, and more connection. You don't need a closet full of clothes you don't wear when a handful of well-chosen pieces make you feel confident and ready. You don't need 20 goals competing for your energy when 3 well-chosen ones will transform your life. The paradox is simple. When you raise your standards, your demand for quantity naturally decreases. But to choose better, you have to know what better means to you. Better doesn't mean more expensive, more luxurious, or more prestigious. It means more aligned with your values, your priorities, your identity, and the life you want to build. Better means things that add to your days instead of cluttering them. Better means things that move you forward instead of holding you in place. Better means things that serve you instead of owning you. Choosing better also means choosing deliberately. Many people choose reactively. They buy because it's on sale. They say yes because they feel obligated. They commit because it looks impressive. They collect responsibilities because everyone else seems to. But deliberate choosing means asking questions before you acquire or commit. Why do I want this? Do I actually need this? Will I use this? Does this align with what matters to me? Even pausing long enough to ask these questions will change what you bring into your life. The same principle applies beyond possessions. It applies to activities. Not every activity deserves space on your calendar. Many people are busy, but not effective. Their days are crowded with filler, things that make them feel active, but don't make their lives richer. Choosing better means building days filled with high-value activities. Deep work instead of busy work. Conversation instead of chatter. Learning instead of scrolling. Experiences instead of consumption. Rest instead of burnout, disguised as productivity. Relationships also benefit from the fewer but better approach. Social quantity is easily overestimated. We're conditioned to believe more friends equal a more fulfilling life. But fulfillment doesn't come from being widely known. It comes from being deeply understood. When you invest in fewer relationships, you create depth, you create trust, you create shared meaning. Shallow connections drain energy because they require performance. Deep connections replenish energy because they allow authenticity. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Access is earned, and it should be rare. When you choose better goals, something interesting happens. You stop competing and start building. Many people chase goals that don't belong to them. Goals inherited from culture, family, or ego. They work hard for achievements they don't genuinely care about, and then feel strangely empty when they reach them. Better goals are not based on appearances. They are based on alignment. They energize you instead of draining you. They transform you instead of distracting you. They reward you with meaning instead of applause. Choosing better also affects your environment. A cluttered environment creates a cluttered mind. Every object takes a small amount of attention. Every unfinished project takes a mental bookmark. Every unnecessary possession takes space that could be used for something more meaningful, or for nothing, which is sometimes even more valuable. Space itself is not emptiness. Space is potential. When you own fewer things, the things you own are easier to appreciate, maintain, and enjoy. But here's the deeper truth. Choosing better is a continuous practice, not a one-time decision. Your needs evolve, your tastes evolve, your priorities evolve. What was better for you 3 years ago might not be better for you now. A simple life stays simple because it gets recalibrated. When life feels heavy, it's often a sign that your calibration is overdue. Choosing better also demands patience. Quality rarely appears quickly. Deep relationships take time. Skill mastery takes time. Meaningful goals take time. Acting slowly in a world obsessed with speed feels rebellious, but in the most liberating way. When you choose better, you are no longer impressed by how fast you acquire things. You are impressed by how deeply you experience them. Ultimately, keeping fewer and choosing better is an act of self-respect. It says, my life is too valuable to fill with things that don't matter. It says, I am allowed to be selective. It says, I would rather have a life that is deep, meaningful, and aligned, than one that is crowded, busy, and hollow. And in a world that urges you to accumulate endlessly, that kind of selectiveness is not only powerful, it's revolutionary. Chapter 5. Break free from the pressure to accumulate. We live in a culture that subtly, and sometimes aggressively, teaches us to measure our worth by how much we acquire. More possessions, more upgrades, more achievements, more experiences, more status, more followers, more everything. The pressure is constant. It shows up in marketing, in conversations, in social media, in comparison, in family expectations, and even in the goals we set for ourselves without questioning why we want them. This pressure to accumulate isn't just about owning more things. It's about proving something. Proving success, proving relevance, proving capability, proving identity. But the moment you tie your value to accumulation, you set yourself up for a life of endless chasing. Accumulation has no finish line. There is always another level, a better house, a newer phone, a bigger title, a more impressive milestone. The problem isn't aspiration. Aspiration is healthy. The problem is the inability to feel complete without the next acquisition. When you can't feel satisfied unless you have more, you lose the ability to enjoy what you currently have. Satisfaction gets postponed. Gratitude gets muted. Presence gets replaced by anticipation. You're always looking ahead, never appreciating now. To break free from this pressure, you must first understand where it comes from. A large part is cultural conditioning. You were born into a world where accumulation is praised and minimalism is misunderstood. Children are rewarded with toys. Teens are rewarded with gadgets. Teens are rewarded with gadgets. Adults are rewarded with upgrades. The message is consistent. More means better. You're not told to curate, to choose intentionally, or to question what you bring into your life. You're told to get, to keep, and to display. Another part comes from comparison. We don't accumulate in isolation. We accumulate in relation to others. If everyone around you seemed content with less, accumulation wouldn't feel necessary. But when everyone is displaying their highlight reels, it creates an artificial benchmark. You don't compare yourself to reality. You compare yourself to presentation. Presentation always looks better, and so you chase, not for joy, but for parity. Then there's the emotional layer. Many people accumulate to soothe discomfort, shopping to feel better, upgrading to feel relevant, owning to feel secure, buying to feel accomplished. But emotional accumulation is never truly satisfying, because it tries to solve internal issues with external solutions. You can fill your closet, your shelves, and your storage units. But if you never fill the internal gaps, the emptiness returns quickly. Fulfillment doesn't come from accumulation. It comes from alignment. Breaking free doesn't mean rejecting possessions or abandoning ambition. It means rejecting dependency on accumulation for identity. It means shifting from acquiring to curating. It means asking, what adds value to my life? Instead of what do other people expect from me? It means choosing based on who you are, not who you're trying to impress. One of the most liberating realizations you can come to is that you don't need to own everything you admire. You can appreciate things without acquiring them. You can enjoy experiences without documenting them. You can celebrate others' success without feeling deficient in your own. When admiration replaces acquisition, life becomes lighter. You also begin to realize that accumulation isn't just physical, it's mental. People accumulate unfinished projects, unmade decisions, unprocessed emotions, and unfiltered information. These invisible forms of accumulation create even more stress than material possessions. You might be surrounded by objects, but what exhausts you is being surrounded by obligations. That's why some people declutter their home and still feel overwhelmed. The mental clutter remains untouched. Breaking free means decluttering both the physical and the psychological. Another overlooked truth: accumulation steals time. Everything you acquire must be managed, cleaned, organized, repaired, upgraded, stored, insured, or replaced. Owning more doesn't just cost money, it costs time. And time is the currency you never get back. When you accumulate without intention, You trade hours of your life for things that often don't contribute to your happiness or growth. There is a different way to live, and it begins with redefining success. Success is not how much you can stack on top of your life. Success is how much meaning remains once you remove what never mattered. Wealth isn't just the ability to buy, it's the ability to walk away. Freedom isn't the privilege of owning more, it's the privilege of needing less. And confidence isn't built by impressing others, it's built by no longer needing to. When you break free from the pressure to accumulate, you reclaim choice. You stop buying out of impulse. You stop upgrading out of insecurity. You stop pursuing goals out of comparison. Instead, you live from intention. You own what serves you. You pursue what fulfills you. You invest in what grows you. You acquire what aligns with the life you genuinely want, not the life you're told to want. And for the first time, you begin to feel something rare in modern life. Enoughness. Enoughness is not stagnation. It's arrival. It's the moment you stop chasing validation and start living from contentment. And once you experience enoughness, accumulation loses its power over you, because you no longer need more to feel like you are enough. Chapter 6. Learn to ignore the unimportant. Your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess, and yet it is one of the easiest things to lose control of. Every day you are surrounded by endless inputs, notifications, opinions, requests, trends, arguments, expectations, and temptations. Not all of these things are harmful, but most of them are unimportant. And the truth is, the unimportant is more dangerous than the harmful, because it sneaks into your life quietly. Harmful things are loud, unimportant things are subtle. They don't destroy you outright. They distract you slowly. When you fail to ignore the unimportant, you pay for it in mental fragmentation. Your attention gets divided into tiny fragments, until no single task gets the full strength of your mind. You check your phone while eating, while working, while resting, while walking, while doing nothing. You consume information you don't need, engage in conversations that don't matter, and react to situations that have nothing to do with your goals or values. And the worst part is, you often don't even question it. It just feels normal. Learning to ignore the unimportant is not about becoming indifferent or careless. It's about becoming selective. Selective with your time, selective with your responses, selective with your emotional energy. The world will always present you with more than you can handle. Your job is not to handle everything. Your job is to decide what deserves handling. The skill of ignoring is not laziness. It is intelligence. It is the intelligence to focus on what truly moves your life forward and let everything else fall away. Most people treat their attention as if it were infinite. They assume they can afford to care about everything. But attention is limited. You only get so much per day, and once it's spent, it's gone. If you use it on gossip, distractions, arguments, comparisons, and random stimulation, don't be surprised if you have nothing left for creativity, growth, relationships, or meaningful work. Focus requires capacity. Capacity requires guarding your attention. A good place to begin is by asking a simple question whenever something demands your involvement. Is this mine? Not every problem is your problem. Not every conversation is your conversation. Not every fight is your fight. Not every crisis is your crisis. We have a tendency to inherit the stress of others, the expectations of others, and the urgency of others. But when you say yes to things that don't belong to you, you automatically say no to things that do. Another helpful question is, does this change anything important? Many things that feel urgent are actually irrelevant. You could spend hours defending an opinion online, arguing with someone who won't change their mind, consuming news that won't change your life, or keeping up with trends that will be forgotten next month. Modern society rewards reaction, not reflection, but your life improves through reflection. not reaction. Ignoring the unimportant also applies to emotions. Not every emotion deserves a response. Not every impulse deserves action. Not every thought deserves attention. You can feel something without chasing it. You can notice something without participating in it. Emotional discipline is a form of mental minimalism. It allows you to conserve energy for what actually matters, for decisions that shape your future instead of impulses that last 5 minutes. On a practical level, ignoring the unimportant might look like turning off notifications that don't matter, refusing to check news every hour, unfollowing accounts that trigger comparison, reducing digital noise, or avoiding conversations that drain you. But the real shift is internal. It's the moment you no longer feel compelled to respond to everything, to fix everything, to prove everything, or to be everywhere. Silence becomes a choice. Non-reaction becomes a strategy, and peace becomes a result. We often assume that successful or fulfilled people are the ones who do more. But look closely and you'll notice something interesting. High performers, deep thinkers, and fulfilled individuals are not defined by how much they do. They are defined by how much they ignore. They ignore distractions. They ignore noise. They ignore irrelevant opinions. They ignore drama. They ignore comparisons. They ignore everything that pulls them away from their purpose. Learning to ignore is a form of strength, not avoidance. Avoidance is fear-driven. Ignoring is clarity-driven. Avoidance runs away from responsibility. Ignoring refuses to waste energy on what doesn't matter. One keeps you small, the other keeps you focused. And here's the most freeing part. Ignoring the unimportant is not rude. What's rude is expecting someone to sacrifice their life for trivialities. What's rude is someone demanding your time without considering its value. What's rude is thinking that you owe your attention to anyone who asks for it. You don't. You owe your attention to your values, your goals, your health, your relationships, your peace, and your purpose. When you master the art of ignoring, life becomes quieter. Not because the world changes, but because you stop letting everything into your inner world. And in that quiet, you gain something rare. The ability to hear yourself again. Chapter 7. Treat time as your wealth. Money is often treated as the main currency of life. But if you look closer, the most valuable currency you have never sits in your bank account. It sits on your calendar. Time is the one resource you can never earn back once it's spent. You can lose money and regain it. You can lose possessions and replace them. You can lose opportunities and find new ones. But when you lose time, it's gone. And yet, strangely, time is the currency people protect the least. Many people live as if time is abundant and money is scarce. They guard their wallet, but give away their hours freely. They negotiate over price, but not over schedule. They get frustrated over being overcharged, but not over being overbooked. They measure the cost of things in dollars, but rarely in days. But a meaningful life is built by measuring cost in time, not money. If something consumes a year, it's expensive, regardless of its price tag. When you treat time as your wealth, you begin to ask different questions. Instead of asking, how much does this cost? You ask, how much of my life will this require? Instead of asking, can I afford this financially? You ask, can I afford this energetically? Instead of asking, is this a good deal? You ask, is this a wise investment? That mental shift alone will simplify your life more than any organizing system ever could. Time wealth is about allocation. How you allocate your hours reveals what you value, even when your words say otherwise. If you say you value health, but spend no time on movement, rest or nourishment, the truth is in your schedule. If you say you value relationships, but spend no time with the people you love, the truth is in your schedule. If you say you value growth, but spend no time learning or practicing. The truth is in your schedule. Schedules don't lie, they expose priorities. But here's the good news. Priorities can be redesigned. You don't need to overhaul your entire life overnight. Even a small reallocation of time compounds into meaningful change. 10 minutes of reading a day becomes 60 hours a year. 20 minutes of exercise becomes 120 hours of movement annually. 15 minutes of focused work every morning becomes 90 hours of creation. Small commitments become large results when compounded through time, wealth. There is another layer to treating time as wealth, protecting it. Time needs boundaries just like money does. People will ask for your time the way children ask for candy, without any awareness of cost or consequence. Not out of malice, but out of habit. And if you're not careful, your calendar will fill up with other people's priorities, requests, invitations, favors, meetings, obligations, errands, small things that seem harmless until you realize your life has been scheduled for you. Protecting time doesn't always require saying no harshly. Sometimes it requires saying no clearly. Sometimes it requires saying no early. Sometimes it requires saying no silently, by never making yourself always available. Availability is not a virtue when it becomes self-sacrifice. A life without boundaries is a life lived for everyone except yourself. The opposite of protecting time is wasting it. Time can be wasted in obvious ways: mindless scrolling, addictions, procrastination, shallow entertainment. But the most dangerous time wasters are disguised as productivity. If you're not careful, you can spend your days doing things that look productive, but don't move you closer to anything that matters. Busyness is not effectiveness. Activity is not progress. Time wealth requires the wisdom to distinguish motion from movement. Another dimension of time wealth is presence. You can spend time physically while being absent mentally. You can be at dinner while thinking about work. You can be with family while thinking about your phone. You can be on vacation while thinking about your inbox. Presence is not just being there, it's being here. This moment, this conversation, this breath. Presence multiplies time. It takes ordinary hours and turns them into memories, meaning, and connection. There's also the future dimension. Time wealth considers the compounding effect of how you invest your hours today. Skills compound, knowledge compounds, relationships compound, health compounds. If you invest time into things that compound, your future self becomes wealthy in ways money cannot purchase. If you waste time on things that decay, your future self becomes poorer no matter how much money you accumulate. And finally, treating time as wealth changes how you define success. Success stops being measured by how much you have, and starts being measured by how much of your life is truly yours. A person with less money, but more time freedom is often wealthier than someone with more money, but no control over their schedule. The dream is not to be rich financially while being bankrupt in time. The dream is alignment, where your time funds the life you actually want to live. When you begin treating time as your wealth, something profound happens. Life slows down, simplifies, and opens up. You become intentional rather than reactive. You become present rather than distracted. You become directed rather than scattered. And the life you build begins to reflect not what the world pressures you to accumulate, but what you consciously choose to become. Chapter 8. Build simple systems that keep you sane. Chaos isn't always caused by lack of effort. Often it's caused by lack of structure. Most people are not overwhelmed because they are lazy. They are overwhelmed because their life requires constant decision-making, constant problem-solving, and constant reacting. Every day becomes a new negotiation with responsibilities, habits, and tasks. that should already have a process. The result is decision fatigue, mental friction, and unnecessary stress. Systems are the antidote. Systems reduce chaos by reducing the number of decisions you need to make. When you build simple systems, you create order without having to force discipline every single day. A system is not a complicated software or a rigid routine. A system is simply a repeatable way of doing something, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You already use systems without realizing it. How you brush your teeth, how you make coffee, how you lock up your home before you leave. Those things don't require thought anymore, because they've been standardized. Systems make things automatic, and when something becomes automatic, it becomes easier, faster, and less mentally expensive. One of the most powerful forms of simplicity comes from using systems to eliminate micro-stress. Micro-stress is the stress caused by tiny, constant decisions. What should I wear? What should I eat? When should I work? What should I do first? Individually, these decisions seem harmless, but when you make hundreds of them every day, they drain your cognitive energy. Decision fatigue doesn't make life harder. It makes life feel heavier. Systems remove that weight. When you build simple systems, you also remove the need for motivation. Motivation is unreliable. It fluctuates. It comes and goes based on mood, energy, weather, and emotion. Systems don't require you to feel inspired. They only require you to execute. That's why people who rely on motivation burn out quickly, while people who rely on systems build consistency quietly. Consistency doesn't come from hype. It comes from structure. Systems can be applied to every part of life: health, work, relationships, finances, chores, learning, and personal growth. For example, a health system might mean eating similar meals during the week, so you don't spend your nights debating dinner. A financial system might mean automating savings, so you don't rely on willpower. A work system might mean batching tasks, so you're not switching between them all day. Every system reduces friction. Every system gives you back bandwidth. But the best systems are simple. Complexity is tempting, especially in a world that loves optimization and life hacks. But a complicated system is just another problem disguised as a solution. The purpose of a system is to make things easier, not impressive. The simpler the system, the easier it is to maintain. The easier it is to maintain, the more likely it is to succeed. Simplicity is a competitive advantage because it survives real life. Systems also protect you from chaos during low-energy seasons. Anyone can manage life when they feel strong, motivated, and well-rested. The real test comes when life gets heavy, when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're juggling responsibilities, when challenges show up. Systems take over when your willpower collapses. They catch you. They keep you operational. They keep your life from unraveling. A system is a quiet safety net. Another benefit of systems is that they free your mind for more meaningful thinking. When you don't have to obsess over logistics, you create mental space for creativity, problem solving, connection, and reflection. Life becomes less about managing and more about living. Your brain is not meant to store reminders, schedules, and checklists. It's meant to think, imagine, and make decisions. Systems carry the boring part, so your mind is free for the important part. A powerful way to start building systems is to ask, what do I struggle with repeatedly? Wherever there is repetition, there is an opportunity for systemization. If you are repeatedly late, disorganized, overwhelmed, unprepared, or forgetful about something, that area doesn't need more effort. It needs a system. Systems succeed where willpower fails because systems don't get tired. And here's something rarely talked about. Systems reduce emotional friction in relationships. Many arguments between partners and family members are not about values. They're about logistics. Who will do what? When will it be done? How will it be handled? When there is no system, Everything must be renegotiated. When there is a system, responsibility becomes automatic instead of argumentative. Less friction, more harmony. You don't need to overhaul your life to start building systems. Start small. Pick one area that drains you the most and design a repeatable process for it. Over time, these small systems stack and your life becomes noticeably smoother. Days become less chaotic, routines become less stressful, and your mind becomes less cluttered. When you build simple systems, you are no longer at the mercy of chance, mood, or memory. You are engineering ease. You are removing friction. You are creating structure that supports the life you want to live. And in a world that worships complexity, that kind of simplicity is not only rare, it's sanity. Chapter 9. Slow down to go further. Speed has become the default setting of modern life. We rush to work, rush through tasks, rush through meals, rush through conversations, rush through goals. We even rush through rest, as if slowing down for too long might cause us to fall behind. But behind whom? Behind what? So much of our rushing is driven by fear. Fear of missing out, fear of losing relevance, fear of being outpaced, fear of not achieving enough fast enough. We equate speed with progress, but the truth is, speed without direction is just motion, and motion without meaning eventually leads to burnout. Slowing down is not laziness. Slowing down is not weakness. Slowing down is not a lack of ambition. Slowing down is strategy. It is the art of moving through life with intention instead of impulse. It is the recognition that the fastest path is not always the most effective one. If speed were all that mattered, the people who rushed the most would be the happiest and most fulfilled. But they aren't. In fact, people who rush the most often feel the least satisfaction because rushing forces them to skim life instead of live it. When you slow down, you gain the ability to think. Thinking is underrated in a world obsessed with doing. Deep thought allows you to make better decisions, choose better opportunities, avoid unnecessary mistakes, and invest your time where it actually matters. A rushed mind cannot see clearly. It reacts instead of reflects. It repeats instead of innovates. It accumulates instead of curates. Slowing down gives you access to clarity, and clarity is a multiplier. There is also the emotional dimension. When you move too fast, you stop feeling, you stop noticing the subtleties of life. The warmth in a conversation, the beauty of a quiet morning, the satisfaction of a task well done, the comfort of being present with people you love. Busyness numbs these experiences. It takes richness out of life and replaces it with efficiency. Efficiency may help machines, but it drains humans. Humans are not designed to exist purely in output mode. We are designed to savor, absorb, and interpret life. One of the most powerful aspects of slowing down is that it improves the quality of your effort. When you rush, you multitask, you cut corners, you produce mediocre results, and you often have to redo things later. When you slow down, you give tasks the attention they need the first time. You create work you are proud of. You build discipline instead of urgency. You make fewer errors. High-quality outcomes require depth, and depth requires pace. This principle applies to goals as well. Many people choose goals based on how quickly they can be achieved. They want fast results, fast transformation, fast success. But meaningful goals rarely operate on fast timelines. Learning a skill takes time. Building a business takes time. Deep relationships take time. Character takes time. Health takes time. You cannot rush compounding. Compounding is earned slowly, quietly, and consistently. When you slow down, you allow compounding to work in your favor. Slowing down also gives you the opportunity to observe. You begin to notice patterns. What drains you, what energizes you, what distracts you, what moves you forward. You become a student of your own behavior. Self-awareness is a superpower, and it begins the moment you stop sprinting long enough to look around. Observation leads to insight, and insight leads to better choices. Better choices, compounded over time, deliver better lives. In relationships, slowing down is essential. You cannot build trust quickly. You cannot build intimacy quickly. You cannot build understanding quickly. The human heart does not operate on speed. It operates on presence. The more rushed your interactions, the more shallow they become. The more shallow they become, the less fulfilling they feel. Relationships are not fast food experiences. They are slow-cooked experiences. They require patience, attention, and time. When you choose to slow down, you also reclaim control from urgency. Urgency is one of the biggest manipulators in modern life. Everything feels urgent: emails, notifications, deadlines, updates, demands. But true urgency is rare. Most urgency is manufactured. It's designed to pull you off your priorities and into someone else's agenda. When you slow down, you begin to question urgency. Does this actually need to be done now? Does this even matter? Those two questions alone can eliminate half the stress in your life. The irony is that slowing down actually makes you faster in the long term. It helps you avoid costly mistakes. It helps you choose better strategies. It helps you build sustainable habits. It prevents burnout, so you don't have to constantly restart from zero. It allows you to build momentum steadily, instead of sprinting and collapsing. In other words, slow is smooth, and smooth becomes fast. Finally, slowing down reconnects you with life itself. Simplicity is not just about having fewer things. It's about experiencing more of what is already in front of you. When life becomes less of a rush, it becomes more of a journey. You stop racing to the next milestone and start appreciating the step you're in. And in that appreciation, fulfillment takes root. Because fulfillment doesn't come from speed. Fulfillment comes from depth. Depth in work, depth in relationships, depth in experience, depth in self, and depth is only possible when you slow down. Chapter 10. Say no more than you say yes. Your life becomes simpler the moment you realize you are not obligated to accept everything that comes your way. Most people don't drown because they jump into deep water. They drown because they keep saying yes to more than they can carry. Saying yes feels polite, cooperative, supportive, even ambitious. But every yes carries a cost. It costs time, energy, attention, and sometimes your peace. You cannot live a simple, intentional life if you're constantly signing yourself up to manage everyone else's priorities. From a young age, we're conditioned to believe that saying yes makes us helpful, likable, and successful. But over time, those yeses accumulate. They turn into commitments, expectations, and responsibilities that quietly shape your life. Before you know it, your schedule reflects other people's desires instead of your own. Your time belongs to whoever asks for it first. Your energy is spent not on what fulfills you, but on what obligates you. This is how life becomes complicated, not by force, but by consent. The irony is that people often avoid saying no because they fear disappointing others. But by avoiding that short moment of discomfort, they create a much longer period of burden for themselves. A 5-second no can save you from a 5-month obligation. A simple refusal can protect a year of mental bandwidth. The truth is, you will always disappoint someone. The question is, will you disappoint others occasionally or yourself consistently? Saying no is not selfish. It is self-respecting. It is boundary forming. It is clarity in action. When you say no, you are choosing to direct your life instead of allowing it to be directed for you. Consider every yes as a small contract. When you say yes, you are agreeing to give up a portion of your life. The only rational approach is to be selective. Selective with opportunities. Selective with commitments. Selective with access. This doesn't mean you should say no to everything. It means you should say yes only to the things that deserve your time, align with your values, contribute to your goals, or genuinely bring fulfillment. And when you do say yes, it should be a full yes, not a reluctant, guilt-driven, or fear-based yes. A life filled with shallow yeses leaves no space for deep commitments. It's depth that makes a life meaningful, not volume. One reason people struggle to say no is that they misunderstand generosity. Generosity is powerful, but real generosity has a structure. It has boundaries. A yes without boundaries is not generosity, it's self-erasure. You cannot pour endlessly without refilling. You cannot give meaningfully if you are depleted. Healthy giving comes from overflow, not obligation. The world doesn't need you to say yes to everything. The world needs you to show up well for the things that truly matter. Another reason people struggle to say no is the fear of missing out. Opportunities feel scarce. It feels dangerous to decline them. But the most successful and fulfilled individuals are not those who chase every opportunity. They are those who curate. They choose the few that align and ignore the many that distract. Opportunity is not valuable simply because it exists. It's valuable when it aligns with direction. The person who pursues everything advances nowhere. There is also the social pressure factor. Many requests come disguised as expectations, invitations to events, obligations to participate, pressure to match others' pace. But you are not responsible for satisfying every social script. You are responsible for designing a life that feels meaningful. A life that is crammed with obligations might look impressive from the outside, but internally it feels suffocating. Learning to say no starts with learning to pause. Instead of responding instantly, ask yourself, is this worth exchanging part of my life for? If the answer is no, decline. If the answer is unclear, it's likely a no disguised as maybe. Very few yeses require urgency. Most yeses require honesty. And honesty requires time. There are polite ways to decline that don't damage relationships. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not available. Thank you for thinking of me, but I need to pass. That sounds interesting, but it doesn't fit my priorities right now. Notice none of these require explanation or justification. A no without apology holds power. A no with clarity holds respect. When you begin saying no more often, you'll notice something transformative. Your yes becomes more meaningful. Your commitments become deeper. Your presence becomes stronger. Your time becomes protected. The people who value you will respect your boundaries, and the people who only valued your compliance will fall away. That's a useful sorting mechanism. In the end, simplicity isn't just about owning less or doing less. It's about agreeing less. Agreements shape your life. Agreements consume your days. Agreements determine your energy. The life you want is not built from the yeses you give out of fear or guilt, but from the yeses you give from clarity and intention. Say no more often, so the yeses you choose can actually take you somewhere. Chapter 11. Rewrite your relationship with possessions. Possessions are not just objects. They're symbols, stories, and sometimes even identities. What we own influences how we feel, how we behave, and how we perceive ourselves. Yet most people never examine their relationship with their things. They accumulate by default, keep by habit, display for validation, and replace out of boredom. The result is a life full of objects, but starved of intention. To rewrite your relationship with possessions, you first have to recognize the emotional scripts behind them. People buy for many reasons: comfort, status, security, distraction, reward, escape, thrill, or nostalgia. But rarely do they buy from clarity. Buying becomes a form of self-soothing, a brief sense of control in a chaotic world. For a moment, purchases feel exciting, but excitement fades quickly, and objects turn into clutter. Clutter isn't just physical. Clutter is delayed decision-making. Every item in your space is a decision you postponed. Keep, discard, store, fix, use, or ignore. Those undecided decisions create mental weight. When possessions accumulate faster than purpose, life becomes crowded. It becomes harder to focus, harder to move, harder to clean, harder to rest. Visual noise becomes internal noise. People often underestimate how much their environment influences their mind. A messy environment is not harmless. It demands attention. Even objects you're not using still occupy psychological space. They remind you of unfinished plans, abandoned hobbies, or aspirations you never committed to. Objects can become ghosts of who you thought you would be. Rewriting your relationship with possessions doesn't mean living with nothing. It means owning with intention. It means asking, does this support my life or complicate it? The question isn't, do I like it? The question is, does it matter? Many things you like do not matter. Many things that matter are not things you buy. Ownership should be functional, emotional, or meaningful. If something doesn't serve you in any of those three ways, why carry it? This shift reveals an important truth. Possessions should serve you, not own you. People think owning more provides freedom, but often it reduces it. The more you own, the more you must store, clean, maintain, insure, protect, and eventually replace. Ownership has hidden fees. Simplicity reduces those fees. When you own less, you spend less time managing your things and more time living your life. The culture of accumulation tells you that new equals better, but new doesn't guarantee improvement. New simply guarantees novelty. Novelty fades quickly. Utility lasts longer. Meaning lasts longest. When you rewrite your relationship with possessions, you begin to ask, what longevity does this bring? What meaning does this carry? That's when you stop chasing trends and start curating essentials. A surprising benefit of owning less is that appreciation increases. When you have 20 things, you appreciate none. When you have 3 things you truly value, you appreciate all of them. Scarcity breeds appreciation, not abundance. Appreciation is not only emotional, it's practical. If you own fewer clothes, you wear them more, care for them better, and choose them intentionally. If you own fewer tools, you use them more efficiently. If you own fewer entertainment devices, you enjoy them more deeply. Possessions become partners, not props. There is also the identity layer. Many people subconsciously use possessions as identity boosters. Cars, clothes, gadgets, decor, objects chosen, not for personal value, but for social signaling. But social identity built on possessions is fragile. It requires constant updating, upgrading, and displaying. And even if the world applauds, inner fulfillment rarely follows. When your identity no longer depends on what you own, you gain an incredible freedom. The freedom to choose belongings that serve your life instead of your reputation. Rewriting your relationship with possessions also requires redefining enough. Enough is a word rarely used in a consumer-driven world. Enough implies satisfaction. Enough implies completion. Enough implies boundaries. Without a sense of enough, accumulation becomes endless. But enough is different for everyone. Enough isn't minimalism, it's alignment. Enough isn't deprivation, it's contentment. Enough isn't scarcity, it's sovereignty. To make this shift sustainable, focus on subtraction rather than decluttering. Decluttering is an event, subtraction is a mindset. Decluttering removes what you don't want. Subtraction prevents it from returning. Decluttering focuses on the house. Subtraction focuses on the habits. Anyone can declutter a closet. Few people examine the impulse that filled it. When you remove the impulse, image, insecurity, boredom, comparison. Your space stays simple because your desires become simple. One more psychological truth: the fewer possessions you depend on, the less fear you carry. Fear of loss decreases, fear of damage decreases, fear of replacement decreases, fear of maintenance decreases. Life becomes lighter. Possessions stop being anchors. They become tools. Tools are used. Anchors keep you stuck. In the end, simplicity isn't about living with the least. It's about living with what matters. Rewriting your relationship with possessions is not a reduction, it's a refinement. It's choosing depth over display, meaning over appearance, and intentionality over impulse. It's the decision to design a life that feels rich, not because of how much you own, but because of how little you need. Chapter 12. Turn down the noise of the world. The modern world is loud. Not just in sound, but in stimulation. Noise today comes through screens, conversations, opinions, comparison, entertainment, marketing, and constant connection. It fills your mind before it has a chance to wake up and follows you into sleep if you don't actively shut it off. Most of this noise isn't harmful in the dramatic sense. It's harmful in the cumulative sense. It steals your attention one notification at a time, your peace one headline at a time, your confidence one comparison at a time. And what makes it dangerous is how normal it feels. Noise creates urgency where there is none. It makes the unimportant feel important. It pulls you into conversations you didn't start, battles you didn't choose, and expectations you never agreed to. When life feels overwhelming, it's rarely because you don't know what you want. It's because you're hearing too much from the outside to listen to yourself on the inside. Simplicity requires quiet, not silence in the literal sense, but stillness in the psychological one. Turning down the noise doesn't mean abandoning the world. It means being selective about which parts of the world enter your mind. The world has opinions, the world has demands, the world has trends, the world has anxieties, but you are not obligated to internalize all of it. Just like you curate what you bring into your home, you must curate what you allow into your mental space. You can't think deeply if you're constantly interrupted. You can't feel deeply if you're constantly stimulated. And you can't live intentionally if you're constantly reacting. One major source of noise is digital stimulation. Phones, apps, notifications, alerts, and feeds were designed for attention capture, not for human well-being. Nothing has ever been built that can steal attention faster than a smartphone, and most people surrender their attention without even noticing. They wake up and immediately hand their mind to the digital world. Before coffee, before gratitude, before introspection, before intention, noise arrives. And once you start your day in reaction, it's hard to get back into direction. Another form of noise is the noise of opinions. Everyone today has something to say about how you should live, work, believe, behave, succeed, parent, spend, or dream. But no one else has to live with the consequences of your choices. Only you do. Listening to too many opinions makes your life blurry. You stop trusting your judgment. You start outsourcing your decisions. You become a patchwork of other people's expectations instead of a single expression of your own values. Opinions can inform you, but they should never command you. There's also the noise of comparison. Comparison is a constant whisper that tells you you're behind, you're lacking, you're failing, or you're not enough. Social media magnifies this whisper into a chorus. You compare your beginning to someone's middle, your routine days to someone's highlight reel, your inner world to someone's outer performance. But comparison is a thief with a charming disguise. It steals joy, motivation, and clarity. And for what? A scoreboard no one agreed on, and no one wins. Then there is ideological noise. The noise of narratives, conflicts, politics, outrage, and controversy. The world loves drama. Drama sells, drama spreads, drama stimulates. But constant exposure to outrage trains your brain to respond emotionally instead of rationally. It keeps you in a state of low-grade anxiety that never completely shuts off. Outrage creates noise, peace creates clarity, and clarity requires you to carefully guard what you expose yourself to. Turning down the noise doesn't require isolation. It requires filtration. It requires intentional boundaries. It requires developing the courage to disconnect without feeling guilty, to step away without feeling irresponsible, and to ignore without feeling uninformed. Quiet is not ignorance. Quiet is strength. It's the strength to protect your attention for what actually matters. Practically, reducing noise may look like setting specific times of day for technology, eliminating notifications that don't serve you, putting your phone in another room during important work, or choosing intentional media instead of endless feeds. It may look like unsubscribing from sources that provoke more anxiety than insight, or stepping back from conversations that generate more heat than light. It may look like starting your mornings without screens so your mind wakes up in your life, not someone else's agenda. The deeper layer is learning to create internal quiet. External noise can be shut off with switches and settings. Internal noise requires awareness. Internal noise is worry, rumination, self-criticism, imagined scenarios, replaying past events, or obsessing over future outcomes. When the world is loud, and the mind is also loud, life becomes suffocating. When the world is loud but the mind is quiet, life becomes manageable. And when both become quiet, life becomes meaningful. To cultivate internal quiet, you must practice presence. Presence slows thoughts down. It aligns attention with what's in front of you instead of what's chasing you. Presence invites you into the moment you are actually living, instead of the ones you have already lived, or the ones you have yet to experience. Presence is not mystical, it's practical. It is simply the act of coming back to now. When you turn down the noise of the world, you don't lose information, you gain clarity. You don't lose connection, you gain intimacy. You don't lose stimulation, you gain focus. You don't lose relevance, you gain direction. Noise tells you who to be. Quiet allows you to discover who you are. Chapter 13. Choose depth over social volume. Modern culture has tricked many people into believing that connection is a numbers game. More followers, more contacts, more group chats, more networking, more social circles, more invitations, more interactions. On the surface, it feels like richness. It feels like relevance. It feels like community. But quantity is a misleading metric. You can know hundreds of people and still feel lonely. You can talk all day and still not feel understood. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. True connection doesn't come from volume. It comes from depth. Depth requires time, attention, vulnerability, and consistency. Those four ingredients cannot be spread thinly across dozens of relationships without losing potency. When you try to maintain social volume, you end up with relationships that are shallow, transactional, or performative. They remain at the level of updates and opinions rather than values and meaning. You know about each other's lives, but not about each other's hearts. You can converse for hours, but never touch anything real. And after it's over, you leave feeling entertained rather than nourished. Choosing depth means becoming intentional about who you give your social energy to. Not everyone needs access to your story, your struggles, your dreams, your fears, or your inner world. Access is not a default, it's a privilege. When everyone has access, no one has intimacy. Depth requires selective openness. It requires choosing a smaller circle where mutual trust, understanding, and growth become possible. One of the reasons people avoid depth is that depth requires vulnerability. Vulnerability is exposure. Vulnerability is uncertainty. Vulnerability is the risk of being misunderstood or rejected. So instead, many choose safety. They stay on the surface where nothing important is shared, and therefore nothing important can be hurt. But the safety of the surface comes at the cost of nourishment. Shallow relationships protect from pain, but they also block connection. No one feels deeply fulfilled by conversations that stay polite forever. Depth also requires patience. You cannot rush trust. You cannot microwave closeness. You cannot accelerate familiarity. Deep relationships form slowly through repeated interaction, shared experiences, and emotional sincerity. They require showing up, not just for the highlights, but for the quiet, unremarkable, everyday parts of life. The world loves everything fast, but the heart loves everything slow. When you choose depth, you choose the pace that matches the heart, instead of the pace that matches the algorithm. Choosing depth also means accepting that some relationships will not go there with you. Not because the other person is bad or unworthy, but because not every connection has the capacity or compatibility for depth. That's okay. Depth is not about forcing relationships. It's about filtering them. When you stop trying to make everyone a close friend, social clarity emerges. You begin to see who is aligned, who is reciprocal, who is supportive, who is curious about you, and who only wants to be entertained by you. There is also the matter of expectations. Social volume thrives on low expectations, quick replies, witty exchanges, convenience-based interactions. Depth thrives on higher expectations, honesty, loyalty, presence, and emotional courage. When you raise your relational standards, volume naturally decreases. Some people will drift away, some will quietly exit, some will lose interest. That is not a loss, it is a filtration. The ones who remain will give you what volume never could: meaning. An often overlooked benefit of choosing depth is that it reduces social anxiety. When you stop trying to maintain hundreds of weak ties, you free yourself from the invisible pressure of appearance, performance, and approval. You stop trying to impress and start trying to connect. You stop worrying about being interesting and start focusing on being interested. Shallow connections are exhausting. Deep ones are energizing. Depth also transforms conversations. Instead of talking about updates, gossip, trends, and headlines, you begin talking about fears, dreams, values, mistakes, goals, growth, philosophy, and truth. Conversation becomes a form of exploration rather than a form of entertainment. You learn more about yourself in the process. Good conversations are mirrors. They reflect back parts of you that you cannot see alone. This principle applies to romantic relationships as well. Many people seek intense chemistry, but chemistry without depth fades quickly. Depth builds compatibility. Depth builds understanding. Depth builds longevity. Chemistry sparkles, depth sustains. You can feel passion for many, but connection with few. Choosing depth also affects your digital life. The internet rewards volume. Social platforms encourage accumulation, followers, likes, views, connections. But digital metrics rarely reflect real intimacy. You can be digitally visible and emotionally isolated at the same time. When you choose depth, you begin to use digital tools for alignment rather than validation. You message fewer people, but have richer exchanges. You scroll less but reflect more. You observe more but compare less. At its core, choosing depth over social volume is an act of courage. It is easier to be liked by many than known by a few. It is easier to chat than to reveal. It is easier to perform than to connect. But easier rarely leads to fulfillment. Fulfillment comes from depth. Depth in relationships, depth in conversation, depth in commitment, depth in presence. When you begin choosing depth, social life doesn't shrink, it becomes real. The hollowness dissolves, the noise fades. The pressure to impress drops, and slowly, as depth grows, loneliness retreats, not because you have more people, but because you finally have the right ones. Chapter 14. Automate what doesn't need willpower. One of the biggest misunderstandings about living a disciplined, intentional, and simple life is the belief that you need endless willpower to maintain it. People imagine that the key to productivity, health, financial stability, and personal growth is waking up every day and fighting through resistance with sheer motivation. But motivation is inconsistent, and willpower is limited. If your life relies on daily heroic effort, it will eventually break down. Simplicity isn't built on constant struggle. It's built on structure, and structure becomes powerful when you automate what doesn't need willpower. Automation doesn't always mean technology. It means creating systems, rules, and defaults that remove decision-making from your daily life. Every decision costs energy, even small decisions. What to wear, what to eat, when to start, how to organize, where to store things, can drain mental resources. And when the mind is drained by unnecessary decisions, it has less power for meaningful ones. The person who spends the morning arguing with their mind over tiny choices often arrives at noon exhausted without having done anything truly important. When you automate, you eliminate the need to decide. You eliminate the need to negotiate with yourself. You eliminate the need to rely on motivation. For example, if you automate savings, you don't have to constantly remind yourself to transfer money. It happens without thought. If you automate bill payments, you don't have to track due dates. If you automate certain meals during the week, you don't have to waste energy debating dinner every night. These small automatisms accumulate into a lighter life. There's also automation through habit design. Habits are simply behaviors that have been automated through repetition. Once a habit is in place, it removes friction. You don't need to convince yourself to brush your teeth or wear clothes. It happens automatically. The same can happen for reading, walking, exercising, stretching, journaling, or practicing. The mistake people make is trying to rely on intensity instead of sovereignty. Intensity says, do more today. Sovereignty says, make it automatic so I don't have to think about it tomorrow. Defaults are another form of automation. A default is a pre-made decision that guides behavior without needing deliberation. For example, a default bedtime protects your sleep. A default no-screen hour protects your attention. A default work block protects your productivity. A default weekly planning session protects your alignment. Defaults remove uncertainty, and uncertainty is expensive. The more uncertain your day feels, the more chaotic it becomes. Automation can also mean building if-then rules for yourself. These rules reduce ambiguity and prevent emotional decision-making. For example, if it's Monday, I learn. If it's Wednesday, I work out. If it's Friday, I review finances. If I'm anxious, I go for a walk. If I'm overwhelmed, I journal. These simple rules free you from negotiating with your feelings every time. Feelings are inconsistent. Rules are consistent. One powerful benefit of automation is that it frees willpower for creativity, problem solving, and growth. Willpower is a finite resource, but most people waste it trying to start things that could have already been started by systems. If you don't automate, life becomes a series of manual tasks that constantly require activation. Automation reduces activation energy. It makes hard things easier and easy things effortless. The resistance to automation often comes from perfectionism. Some people believe that structure kills spontaneity, but structure doesn't kill spontaneity. Chaos does. Chaos consumes your attention, time, and confidence. Structure creates space. When small tasks are automated, you gain the freedom to choose how to use your remaining energy. You gain time for creativity, presence, and play. Automation doesn't make life rigid. It removes the friction that prevents fluidity. There is another layer to consider: emotional automation. Emotional automation doesn't mean suppressing feelings. It means building constructive defaults for emotional experiences. Instead of numbing stress with scrolling or snacking, you build a default habit of stepping away, breathing, or moving. Instead of reacting impulsively in conflict, you build a default habit of pausing before responding. Instead of catastrophizing uncertainty, you build a default habit of asking for clarity. These automatic responses protect peace instead of disrupting it. Financial automation is equally transformative. When you automate savings, investments, or debt payments, you protect your future from your impulses. Humans are notoriously bad at long-term planning when decisions are made in the moment. Automation bypasses the moment. It creates discipline without drama. Wealth rarely grows from brilliance. It grows from consistency. The deeper benefit of automation is the removal of shame. When everything depends on motivation and willpower, failure feels personal. You begin to believe you are weak, lazy, or undisciplined. But when actions are automated, failure becomes rare. The fewer decisions you rely on, the fewer battles you fight with yourself. Self-respect increases, not because you became tougher, but because you became smarter. Ultimately, automation is a form of kindness to your future self. It says, I care enough about my life to make good things easier and bad things harder. When you automate what doesn't need willpower, you stop living by reaction and start living by design. And design is the foundation of simplicity. Chapter 15. Adopt simplicity as a life philosophy. Simplicity can begin as a tactic: cleaning a drawer, organizing a schedule, saying no more often, removing distractions. But tactics alone won't transform your life. For simplicity to become powerful, to become sustainable, to become freeing, it must evolve into a philosophy. A philosophy is not something you do occasionally. It's something that shapes how you think, how you choose, how you evaluate, and how you live. When simplicity becomes a philosophy, it stops being a phase and starts being an identity. Most people encounter simplicity as a reaction. They simplify because they're overwhelmed, because they're exhausted, because life has become too heavy, too busy, too loud, or too complicated. But reaction-driven simplicity is temporary. It fixes the immediate crisis, and then old habits return. That's why so many people declutter their homes, only to fill them again, or simplify their schedules, only to overload them again. Without a shift in philosophy, the environment changes briefly, but the mindset stays the same. A philosophy of simplicity asks a deeper question: what kind of life is worth living? Not in the poetic sense, but in the practical one. A life where you have space for relationships, for creativity, for rest, for growth, for health, for love, for presence. A life where you are not constantly rushing through everything just to get to the next thing. A life where value is measured not by accumulation, but by alignment. When simplicity becomes philosophical, it influences how you define success. Instead of judging success by how much you acquire, you begin to judge it by how much of your life is truly yours. How many of your days reflect your values? How many of your choices come from intention rather than obligation? How much time you have for what matters instead of what distracts? The richest life is rarely the one with the most possessions, but the one with the least regret. One major shift that happens when simplicity becomes a philosophy is the recognition that trade-offs are unavoidable. You can't say yes to everything and also live a meaningful life. You can't maintain unlimited relationships and still have deep ones. You can't chase every opportunity and still master one. You can't consume infinite content and still hear your own mind. A philosophy of simplicity embraces limitation, not as deprivation, but as selection. Selection is power. Selection is identity. Selection is freedom. Simplicity also changes how you relate to time. Time stops being something you squeeze productivity out of and becomes something you protect. You begin to see time not as an empty container to be filled, but as a resource to be honored. You slow down intentionally. You rest without guilt. You stop apologizing for boundaries that keep you sane. You stop believing that busyness is a badge of honor. Instead, you begin to admire spaciousness, clarity, and balance. Another hallmark of a simplicity philosophy is detachment from external noise. You stop letting trends dictate your priorities. You stop letting comparison dictate your worth. You stop letting social pressure dictate your decisions. You begin to build a life that feels true, even if it doesn't look impressive. And that is rare in a world trained to value appearance over authenticity. But perhaps the most powerful shift is this: simplicity becomes proactive instead of reactive. You don't wait for life to get chaotic before you simplify. You simplify to prevent chaos. You don't wait for burnout before you rest. You rest to prevent burnout. You don't wait for clutter before you declutter. You curate so clutter never arrives. Simplicity becomes maintenance instead of repair. It becomes prevention instead of recovery. This philosophy also makes room for joy. When life is overcrowded, joy has no space to land. When life slows and simplifies, joy becomes more noticeable. Not dramatic joy, but quiet joy. The joy of presence, of clarity, of connection, of competence, of creativity, of enoughness. These forms of joy are small in appearance, but immense in impact. They are the kind of joy that accumulates in memories, not in selfies. To adopt simplicity as a philosophy, you don't need to abandon ambition. Ambition and simplicity are not opposites. In fact, simplicity strengthens ambition. When your life is not weighed down by clutter, physical, emotional, relational, or digital, you gain an extraordinary kind of focus. That focus lets ambition become deep instead of scattered. You pursue fewer things, but achieve more through them. Philosophical simplicity also changes how you approach desire. You no longer chase things because they are available, trendy, or socially rewarded. You choose desires that align with your identity, your values, and your long-term meaning. Desire becomes filtered, and when desire becomes filtered, life becomes far less chaotic. The transition from tactic to philosophy is gradual. It starts with choices, then it becomes habits, then it becomes worldview. Eventually it becomes ease. The ultimate goal of simplicity is not to own less, do less, or be less. The ultimate goal of simplicity is to be more present, more intentional, more free, and more alive. When simplicity becomes who you are, and not just what you do, life doesn't just get lighter, it becomes profoundly richer. Conclusion. The promise of simplicity has always been the same. When you remove what doesn't matter, what does matter finally has room to breathe. Throughout this audiobook, we explored how a life that is less crowded, less rushed, less reactive, and less burdened becomes a life that is more meaningful, more focused, more peaceful, and more fulfilling. Not because simplicity gives you more, but because it gives you more of what you actually need. The world will always push you toward more. More consumption, more commitments, more pressure, more speed, more noise. It will never voluntarily create space for you to think, to pause, to rest, to reflect, or to be intentional. That space has to be built by you. Simplicity is that building process. It is the conscious reclaiming of your time, energy, attention, and identity from forces that would otherwise scatter them. A simple life is not a small life. It is not a life without ambition, curiosity, or achievement. In fact, simplicity strengthens ambition by removing the distractions that dilute it. It strengthens relationships by reducing the social clutter that crowds intimacy. It strengthens creativity by freeing mental bandwidth. It strengthens self-respect because you are no longer abandoning yourself for every demand that shows up. Simplicity doesn't shrink life, it sharpens it. It makes life more deliberate. The real challenge is not understanding simplicity, it is sustaining it. Anyone can simplify when overwhelmed. Anyone can declutter when